Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Last video you saw, we were talking about MEL, CDL. So a little bit different than the normal stuff that I did last year. I'm going to kind of keep that rolling. I'm going to do a little bit different stuff here the next probably 3-4 videos, maybe something like that. Last year I focused very heavily on the 7.6 and the 7.5. Many of you know that's my background. That's what I taught. That's what, I love that airplane. I absolutely love that airplane. So I'm still going to continue doing 7.6 stuff, and the videos that I make here are still going to have 7.6 information in them. I'm just going to try and go a little bit more generic with certain things. And that's what this series is going to be. This is going to be aviation in 10 minutes-ish. I don't know. I like to hear myself talk, so I guess we'll just see how long the videos go. Today, this video is going to be Autopilot. And not specific to any aircraft, just what an autopilot does in general. Because I think there are some people who might be watching this video who aren't aviation savvy, that think that the autopilot just does everything and all you gotta do is push a button and walk away from it. And we're going to kind of dispel some of those myths, as well as go into some of the system portion of it. Nothing too in-depth, which is why these videos should be a little bit quicker, and we'll see how that goes. All right, so the first thing is what does the autopilot do, right? So everybody seems to think that when a pilot gets into an airplane and they turn the autopilot on, something like this happens.
Automatic pilot, automatic pilot. There it is.
I'll go back to the passengers.
All right, so if you're old enough to know that movie, or if you've been in aviation in any way, shape, or form, I know you've seen this movie at least once or twice. This is Airplane. So people, for some reason, think that when a pilot turns on an autopilot, something just happens where it automatically takes over the aircraft and it flies the airplane for the pilot, which is true in a sense, right? In a sense, it is. But we have to remember that an autopilot is based off of the information that the pilots give it. So it's garbage in, garbage out. If the pilots put the wrong waypoints in, or they put the wrong navigation in, or the wrong altitude in, or something like that, well, guess what? That's what it's going to be. It's going to fly whatever it is. So it's not necessarily a robot or AI flying the airplane. It is an assistant to the crew. That's the way we should look at an autopilot. It is an assistant to the crew. The pilots are still making the decisions on what happens in the flight deck. So if we look at what an autopilot can control, right? And this is going back to general aviation days, right? What your different axes are, whether you've got your yaw, your pitch, and your roll. So this is essentially what your autopilot can control, with some additions, right? Now, granted, not every autopilot is the same. When I was going through flight training, at one point I had a 172 that had an autopilot. I wasn't allowed to use it, but we had a 172 that had an autopilot. The autopilot was just there to maintain navigation. That was all it was for. It would turn you, and that's all it would do, was just turn you. Wouldn't hold altitude. It wouldn't, pitch you to the next altitude. It wouldn't do anything like that. It literally just directed you via the GPS. That was it. So you can have autopilots that are extremely simple, like that, and you can have autopilots that are extremely complex. And when you have autopilots that are extremely complex, you end up having things that look like this in your cockpit. The top left one there, that is, from a 7.6. It's obviously from a presentation that I've done at some point or another, where this shows what the 7.6 is. The one that's in the bottom right-hand corner, I couldn't tell you exactly what that's out of because I'm not familiar enough with all the different aircraft. I can just tell you that I know that that is what's called a mode control panel. This portion right here, an MCP. The mode control panels are going to look different depending on the airplanes that you're in. Some of them are more advanced, some of them are not, right? So on the 7.6 one, we can see that there's a lot of things. Sorry, I need to actually bring my mouse to the actual screen that I have this on. We can see that on the 7.6 one that there's a lot of stuff on here, and then it's relatively complicated for something that was built in the 70s and 80s and 90s and in the 2000s, but it was originally designed in the 70s and 80s, right? So looking at this, we've got flight directors that we can turn on and off. We've got auto throttles that we can arm or turn off. And then we've got different speed modes or different modes. We've got vertical modes. We've got speed modes, and just general navigation. So LNAV, VNAV, that's lateral navigation, vertical navigation. I'm not going to dive into this into the nitty gritty. I'm just kind of giving you an overview of what this panel has on it, right? Next to that is heading. So you've got heading where you dial in your heading, and then you've got heading hold where it holds a specific heading and won't come off of it unless you change it. You got vertical speed. Vertical speed is obviously how fast we're going up or down, right? And then there's issues with that on the 7.6, but we're not getting into that in this video. The altitude, we've got what altitude you're at, and it holds that altitude. And then we've got some other things like localizer, your approach mode, your back course, and then you've got autopilot engaged, whether you have that autopilot engaged or not. I could spend a whole video talking about what each of these buttons do and all that kind of stuff. And if you want to see that, let me know in the comments, and I can make a video based on the 7.6 autopilot. But for right now, we're just talking about the generalities of what an autopilot can do and what the actual controls are, right? So that's the MCP. At least that's, I guess they're also called FCUs, flight control units, things like that. But in my world, we call them an MCP. It's a mode control panel. Inside here, these buttons here can give us what is called an FMA, or a flight mode annunciator. If your aircraft is smart enough to have an autopilot that is this complex, you're going to have things that are going to look similar to this. And when you have things that look similar to this would be like a flat panel, let's say, on a 7.6. And this is what's called an EFIS, or a classic flight deck in the 7.6. It's an ADI that is set off on its own. That's going to depend on how your FMAs look. And FMAs are what tell you what is going on with the autopilot. So in this particular case, the one on the left, the classic flight deck one, that just shows everything that can be on there. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're ever going to see all of that on there. Anything that has a little box that shows up on it means that it changed recently into that mode. Anything that's white means that's the armed mode. Anything that's green, that's the engaged mode. Okay. Now, again, this is all very top level, 30,000 foot kind of stuff, right? So on this side, I got FMC speed. That means that the aircraft is going to go at whatever speed I have listed in the FMC. If I've got it listed at 180, the airplane's going to pitch, power, and whatever for 180. During climbs, it'll pitch and power to keep that particular airspeed. If you're just at level flight, it's just going to keep whatever airspeed you've told it to keep. Next to that, it's LNAV, lateral navigation. Okay, that means that now I can put in a waypoint, and it'll turn me to that waypoint. I have lateral navigation. Then we have VNAV path. This is the vertical navigation portion on it. That tells me that this airplane is probably in a descent. I don't have the full picture of it, so I don't know exactly what it's doing. But VNAV path would tell me that I'm in a descent in some way, shape, or form at a certain speed set in the FMC. Okay, simple enough. On the other side, it's the same stuff. It's just on the bottom of the screen instead of on the top. Okay, so that's the only difference here. So the important thing to remember is not what buttons you've pushed here, because the buttons you push, all that does is arm it. That's all it does. It arms that particular thing. Okay, I've armed my autopilot. I've armed my LNAV, VNAV. I've armed flight level change, so on and so forth, right? Where you actually know that it's engaged in the way that you've told it to be engaged is by looking at your FMAs. In my opinion, every time you push a button, you should be announcing a change. You should be announcing a change. Because every time I push a button, I need to look at my FMA and make sure that it did what I told it to do. And that's why I said it's garbage in, garbage out. If you're not paying attention between the two, it can cause issues. All right, so a misnomer is, well, the autopilot flies the whole thing. I don't even know why we need pilots, right? This is the whole thing Airbus is trying to push, where they want a single pilot in the aircraft, which I think is a word I'm not allowed to say on YouTube. BS. We'll just say BS. It's crap. It should never, ever reduce the amount of people that you have in the flight deck. I don't care how much automation you have. I don't care how safe you think your automation is. It can always fail, right? And you're going to have somebody there in case it does. And if you only have one person on a 10-hour flight, 12-hour flight, guess what? That person's going to be tired, right? That person's going to be tired. Now, for anybody who thinks that the autopilot is on, all you do is push a button and the plane flies itself, let me show you a video that proves that absolutely incorrect. This is the 7.6 taking off out of Miami. Okay, so you're hearing their call outs. They said thrust set. Boy, it looks like it's moving slow, doesn't it? 80 knots. So you do their cross check at 80 knots. That's usually where that's a critical speed there too. No-go speed, right? So that's another conversation. But V1 is a decision speed, meaning you're taking the thing into the air, or you may end up off the end of the runway. So you can see here where the autopilot didn't do any of that, right? The autopilot didn't do any of that. That was all the two pilots. And it was crosstalk, and it was making sure that both things are saying what they're supposed to say and all this other stuff. Then they rotate into the air. Generally, it's going to depend on your airline. It's going to depend on your operation. And it's going to depend on where you fly in and out of and your type of aircraft. But on the 7.6 side, primarily 1,000 feet is where you go into your center command for your autopilot. Generally, your lateral navigation comes in about 400 feet, and then your vertical navigation comes in at about 1,000 feet if you're flying LNAV, VNAV. So, but your center command is usually boom, boom. Center command is going to be at 1,000 feet. That's where your autopilot comes on. And then, okay, from 1,000 feet on, sure, you can say that your autopilot is flying the thing, but you have the inputs as the pilot. The pilot puts the inputs into it and makes sure that the airplane flies and does what it's supposed to do. Okay? Now here's the thing. Is I just said that the autopilot wasn't on during the takeoff, which it's not. And at 1,000 feet, the autopilot's generally on, and it helps fly the airplane. Now, you can hand fly an airplane, technically. You can hand fly an airplane all the way up to about 18,000 feet. Once you get to 18,000 feet, then we get into what's called Class A airspace. Class A airspace is required to have an autopilot and all this other stuff that goes along with it. And then when you get into, 29,000 feet, which is RVSM airspace, now you have to have an autopilot. There is no question whatsoever to be able to be in RVSM airspace. And the question is why? Why do we have to have it when we go into RVSM airspace? And that's because RVSM airspace, everything is a lot closer, right? We go from having greater distances between aircraft to only having 1,000 feet between aircraft. And again, we can talk about that in a different video. I don't want to drag this one out too long. So the question is what happens at cruise? All right, so when you're at cruising altitude at 34, 35, 36,000 feet, what's the airplane doing? What's the crew doing? Okay, well, let me show you what they're doing. This is 36,000 feet. I'm going to pause it right here. You can see on there ADI on that top one there, you can see he's in speed mode, VNav path, LNav, and command, CMD on the far right. That CMD means that the autopilot is engaged. Okay, and then the other two and three, the other three are saying how it's engaged. So my auto throttle mode right here, auto throttle mode is in the speed mode, meaning I am maintaining a specific speed. In this case, it looks like about 0.8 Mach. And then VNav path, that's my vertical portion of it. LNav is my lateral portion of it. Command telling me that I have an autopilot that is engaged. Normally, it's going to be your center autopilot. If you want to know why, you can look at, I think I have a video on that. I'll have to look. I can't remember. If I don't, I can make one. It's talking about why the center command is so important. But as we look at this, and let me let it keep going. Couple other things we can kind of tell. I know I stopped it and it's kind of blurry, but I can also tell that this airplane has Pratt engines on it because it has EPR with an N1 and an N2. If it was a Rolls airplane, it would have an N3. If it was a GE airplane, EPR wouldn't exist. It would just be N1. But you can see how pilots are relatively hands-off when it comes to the cruising portion of it. They just have to, they become system monitors at that point, right? They're making sure that things aren't out of whack, that they are on the altitude that they're supposed to be on, that they are on the airspeed that they're supposed to be on. Because if you're doing things like an overseas trip and you're going over the ocean and you start to get 3 minutes different or greater than 2 minutes different than what you said you were going to be at a point, you need to start letting people know because of how they coordinate their traffic. So there's a few things I can tell just by looking at this video, but it kind of gives you an idea that their pilots are relatively hands-off. They're just watching, right? They're just monitoring at this point. That's all they're doing. So why is an autopilot safer? Why is it safer to fly with an autopilot versus not with an autopilot? Well, let's think about this. If we're flying transatlantic, if we're flying transpacific, if we're flying coast to coast in the U.S., these are long flights, right? Going out to Hawaii from Chicago, 10-hour flight, something like that. Going from Chicago to London Heathrow, 6, 7, 8-hour flight. I literally just said 6, 7, didn't I? I'm sorry. 8-hour flight, something like that. You know, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's not a short flight. Even going from coast to coast, going from JFK to San Francisco is not a short flight. Hell, that's almost a 4-hour flight. And if you've already done a leg before that, you're going to be tired, right? Well, guess what? You get even more tired if you have to constantly hold that control and constantly hold that altitude, constantly hold that airspeed, hold that altitude, hold that airspeed, hold that altitude. You're not able to focus on other things, like your weather radar, like if you're carrying passengers, you're constantly doing this. Imagine what that's doing to the people in the back. I mean, the closer you are to the front of the airplane, the less you feel it. But the people that are all the way back there in steerage and that far, far end of the airplane, they're sitting back there just doing this the whole time. You don't want to do that to them. That's not fun, right? It also allows the cockpit to be more calm, right? You're not constantly having to do something. So you can focus on other things. You can get clearances and you can make sure that you're hearing the radio clearly. You can focus on weather radar and be like, oh, there's a storm coming up. You know, things that you might not notice if you're just sitting there trying to maintain your altitude plus or minus 200 feet. So it also supports safety in the fact that by the time you get to where you're trying to land, which, you know, takeoff and landing is usually where most of the accidents occur, you are as prepared as possible to come in and land the aircraft, and that you're not overly exhausted when you're coming in to land the aircraft. Now, we can get into arguments that, you know, the autopilot can land the airplane, and that's true. It sure can. There is an auto land feature, especially on the 7.6, but you don't want to have to rely on that every time, right? You want to be able to try and land the airplane if you have to. So that's why an autopilot can make flying safer. Common myths that come along with the autopilot that, passengers and people that are non-aviation people don't seem to understand. They think that no pilot's in control when the autopilot's on. They're like, nah, the autopilot's got it. It's fine. The airplane will do what it needs to do to be okay. No. There is a pilot that has to input stuff, right? They think the plane decides for itself where it's going to go because of whatever. And that's true to a point. If you have a nav database that's loaded and you've got a route that's loaded into the airplane will fly that route. It might not do it exactly the way it should, but it will fly that route. If it's set up correctly. I'll say that. If it's set up to do it, it will do it. And then, there are some people out there for some godforsaken reason that think pilots can't override it. They think they can't override the autopilot. And there's numerous ways to override an autopilot. It's in the 7.6, hell, I can think of 3 off the top of my head. I've got a button here. I've got a little thing. I've got I've got 2 buttons over here. I've got a switch and I've got a button. I have a disengage button. I have my trim switches. And then over here, I've got a disengage bar that won't let me engage it anyway. So I've got 3 ways just off the top of my head to override it. I'm sure there's more that I'm not thinking of that, maybe aren't necessarily actual procedures, but that would actually disconnect the autopilot. I don't know, things like tripping a breaker or tripping a generator or something like that will cause the autopilot to kick off. So there's plenty of ways to override it. Big thing to remember when it comes to this kind of stuff is it allows for smooth operation during long flights. It reduces workload on the pilot themselves and allows the operation to run more efficiently and safer in the long run. Because what you don't want is a tired pilot that's been working on keeping altitude the entire time of this 10-hour flight when you're trying to come in and land. Simple as that. Now, on the flip side is do not think that autopilots should ever replace a pilot in the flight deck. We have seen, and I don't care to really argue this necessarily. I believe in my heart that having a pilot, 2 pilots in big aircraft, transport category aircraft, should always and forever be a requirement. Because there is always a potential for automation to fail. If you want an example of automation failing, let's take a look at the autonomous taxis that were in San Francisco. And when it had a power outage, they stopped. The cars stopped. They didn't know where to go. Imagine being on an airplane and it loses generators and the airplane just saying, I don't want to fly anymore. And not having anybody there that could take over in case that happened. Just my thought. Again, I'm not debating it. If you think that automation is going to get to a point where we can have no pilots in the cockpit, good on you. You have more faith than I do. I just live in the mindset of we need to have something that can manually fly the aircraft if needed, that has some sort of control of an aircraft and can make decisions based on observation in what's going on, not just signals that it is receiving. I don't know. Anyway, I said it was going to be 10 minutes ish. It's 24 minutes right now, so I'm done. You saw the little thing come up on the screen, says click subscribe, click the bell, click the like button. All of those things help me out tremendously, both for motivation and for helping the page itself get seen. especially with the bell, because all that does is tell you, hey, I put out a new video, and you'll be able to see this one and numerous other ones that I'm hoping to put out this year. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Send it on. If you didn't like this video, sorry. I'll try and do better next time. But, also share it. Please, share it, because that helps as well. Outside of that, I'm Brandon, your GSI guy, and I appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next one. See ya.